UConn is at the top of the AP polls once again.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Locked On Women's Basketball, your number one sports podcast network, free on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. I'm here with Golden State Valkyries analyst Sophia Jones. I'm Kalia Butler, the sideline reporter for the Chicago Sky, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's happening during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Our roadmap for the day, we are going to get a little bit into some Big 10 and Big 12 ranked teams that are happening tonight, some fun games that you should tune in for. We're also going to go over who the top teams are in each conference right now. I feel like obviously we've talked about all the teams, but we're going to go over the rankings conference for conference. But before we get into that, we have to go over this week's top 25 AP poll. To no surprise, UConn is the unanimous number one vote. They've sat at that number one spot essentially the entire season. They have sat at that number one spot the entire season. They are undefeated. The potential to go back-to-back national champions at this point, but we'll get into that a little bit later. South Carolina sitting at that number two spot after avenging their loss that they had this season, their only loss that they had this season against Texas, which was a good one. UCLA sitting in that third spot. Texas sits at fourth. Vanderbilt has really climbed their way up to at number 5. I feel like they secretly each week just keep rising a little bit higher and higher, and they're actually at the top of the SEC right now. Then you have LSU that fought their way back in after having two significant wins. Michigan State, Louisville, TCU, and Iowa cement the top 10 right now. Sophia, are there any interesting shifts that you've seen within the top 10 in your opinion? I know it's been pretty consistent these past couple of weeks, but who's maybe caught your eye?
I would have to agree with you and say Vanderbilt. Between Vandy and UConn, they're the only undefeated teams remaining in the AP poll. And specifically for Vanderbilt, they definitely cemented themselves in that number 5 spot. I think it's well-deserved, especially when you're looking at their resume and some of these wins that they're getting over LSU. And then this poll was done before the game, but Vanderbilt also beating Michigan as well. So that is extremely crucial. And they continue to remain undefeated, but it'll be interesting coming up in the ACC. I'll also bring up Iowa, who has cracked the top 10 for the first time post Caitlin Clark. So kind of a big moment for them, I would think, in getting this notoriety. They're 7-0 in conference play, so looking pretty strong in the Big Ten, and they're withstanding that schedule. But they're going through a gauntlet in their next 4 games. They face Maryland, Ohio State, USC, and UCLA. So that number 10 spot will be put to the test.
Yeah, this is going to probably be their most difficult stretch that they've had so far this season. They've had to play some tough games already, but having to go basically 4 deep for your next couple of games is rough. We've seen how strong the Big Ten has looked this season, but back to your point of Iowa being in the top 10 for the first time in this post Caitlin Clark era. I think a lot of that has come from Hannah Stuelke, who is a senior now, obviously part of that Caitlin Clark team and that run to the national championship. She's had one of her best weeks so far. The Hawkeyes had beat Oregon 74-66, and then they also beat ranked opponent Michigan State 75-68. She had combined 40 points, 17 rebounds, 13 assists, and 5 steals while shooting 65% from the field during that stretch of time. Then also sophomore center Ava Hayden has really stood out. She had 33 points combined for that week and 15 rebounds. We've talked about it a little bit, I believe just in our past episode, just how strong some of their forwards have looked. And that dynamic duo that they have. But I think Hannah Stuelke has stood out to me most because she is one of the most veteran players for the Hawkeyes right now. And when you're thinking of that post Caitlin Clark era, somebody who was right alongside her and kind of being able to see her growth over the course of Caitlin leaving, joining the WNBA, and Hannah finally being in her senior season. I think at the beginning of the season, I was kind of waiting for her to like crack open into like clearly being the front runner leader of this team. And I think these past couple of weeks, especially this week being one of her best weeks she's had, heavy into conference play and going to need her a lot in these upcoming games, she has definitely been one of the most reliable players for Iowa right now.
I would agree. And I think seniority really comes into play once you get to conference and league play, because when you've been around these same teams for so long, you know a little bit of their inside outs. You recognize the same players, you know the coach's style of play. And so that's where having that experience and knowing where to exploit is really, really valuable. So for Iowa to retain her and retain a lot of people, actually, they've been a solid program in getting a couple 4 years. But I think for her to be in a leadership position is a major reason for Iowa's success.
I want to go back to your point of Vanderbilt too, because Vanderbilt is off to their best start that they've ever had in program history. As you mentioned, alongside UConn, are one of the only unbeaten teams left. Texas Tech is in that conversation too. But they had a really strong week. Michaela Blakes, she had 38 points against Mississippi State. That was a tight game for them too, 89-84. And then they won against Michigan, as you mentioned, 72-69. So they're having some tight victories. Michigan held Michaela Blakes to a season low of 14 points, but that's still a very strong number for her going up against any opponent. But we talked about her yesterday too. I really like the look of Aubrey Galvin, the freshman, getting in there. She had put up a season high 20 points. I think their guard play at Vanderbilt has showcased a lot in some of these tight wins, and they are currently at the top of the SEC. They have some interesting games coming up as well that are going to have to really set the tone and test them, because they have to play against South Carolina, and they are neck and neck in who's going to top the SEC at this current moment. That's going to be a true tale of how good Vanderbilt is really looking right now.
1,000%. That is going to be the game to watch. I don't even think if there's another matchup that day, it's going to matter, because that will be the most important. But for even going into the season, it felt like the conversation was mainly around South Carolina and Texas fighting for that number one spot in the SEC. But I think you really have to throw Vanderbilt in there. And don't count out LSU also, especially once it gets into tournament time. But SEC is just so competitive. You see where once conference play begins, teams either rise or fall. And Vanderbilt was one of the biggest risers. And even looking at the poll right now, you see Kentucky is taking a little bit of a slip. They dropped 4 spots. I think the absence of Tiani Key is really hurting them right now in the front court. You're seeing Oklahoma fall. They've had a couple losses. Mississippi, Tennessee is a team that's actually rising a bit, but there's just so much that fluctuates within the SEC because every game is just a slaughter.
Absolutely. And I do have to correct myself. Texas Tech did lose a game, so apologize. They are no longer undefeated. But another team I want to mention quick in these polls is Louisville, because they are holding it down for the ACC right now when we're looking at these top 10 teams. And this is a team that we spoke early about, that you just got to give them their moment. They're going to shine. And they had really big wins this past week, and they were both road victories. They beat Notre Dame on Thursday. Then they were able to beat NC State in overtime on Sunday. And they're led by a young group too. Sophomore guard Amari Berry has been key for them. She had a career high 33 points and 12 rebounds in their win against NC State, who has dropped out of the rankings, has come back, has had some momentum throughout the season, but we know how difficult that team can be to get past, especially at home. So right now, Louisville looking like one of the strongest teams, holding it down for the ACC and keeping it competitive within the top 10 polls.
Definitely. Louisville has looked really strong as of late. They were really battle tested in their non-conference schedule. They turned the corner looking even stronger. But another team that I'll throw in there for the ACC is the reemergence of Duke, who is at the number 21 seed. They were previously not ranked, and they were 3-6 after December 4 loss to LSU, and are now riding a 10-game winning streak. So they've looked really strong, and they're making the ACC maybe a little bit more competitive than what appears on the surface.
Absolutely. We knew Duke was going to find a way to get it done, and they're slowly coming back into the rankings. Coming up after this, we are going to go over every top team from some of the top conferences right now, diving a little bit deeper into who can really cement themselves as number one within their respective conferences. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. As somebody who Sophia has described before is a new adult and I'm trying to learn how to do my taxes, I would like to keep this as simple as possible for myself. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or the guesswork. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150, all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. I don't like paying rent, and I bet you don't either. But Built makes it just a little bit easier. Built is the loyalty program for renters that rewards you monthly with points and exclusive benefits in your neighborhood. I live in Chicago, so rent is very expensive, plus all the other added fees. It's the winter. There's a lot to pay. So make life a little bit easier on yourself with Built. And let me explain what they have coming up. With Built, every rent payment earns you points that can be used towards flights, hotels, Lyft rides, Amazon.com purchases, and just so much more. And here's something I'm really excited about. Starting next month, Built members can earn points on mortgage payments for the very first time. Soon you'll be able to get rewarded wherever you live and unlock exclusive benefits with more than 45,000 restaurants, fitness studios, pharmacies, and other neighborhood partners. Personally, I would redeem my points for Amazon. I'm a big Amazon consumer. Join the loyalty program for renters at joinbuilt.com/lockedonwomen. That's JOINBILT.com/lockedonwomen. Make sure to use our URL so that they know we sent you. Alrighty, so we've talked through the AP polls, who's in the top 25. Obviously, we go over all the games, but we want to check in with you on who is really the top of the conference. Some of them you may or may not be surprised by. We're going to go over Big Ten first. UCLA has remained dominant in Big Ten play. They are on an 11-game winning streak. They are 7-0 in conference. Their only loss this season coming to Texas, who is obviously a non-conference team. Once they got into Big Ten play, they've just been cruising ever since. And at this rate, it looks like they are going to be very difficult to stop. Looking ahead at their schedules, they're going to be playing Purdue. They're going to be playing Northwestern, teams that they have beat before and have had pretty comfortable wins against them. But they're just a little too deep in their bag, from Lauren Betts to their guards. Nobody compares to the versatility that they have, in my opinion, within the Big Ten, no matter how good these other teams look as well.
I would have to agree. They look like the clear in a way front runners in that conference. They're 7-0. The closest game that they faced was Ohio State, where they still won 82-75. Ohio State is number 3 right now in the Big Ten, right under Iowa. So when you're looking at what teams would go up against the Bruins the most, Ohio State already took an L. You saw how UCLA obliterated Maryland, and they're a team that's outside the top 5 in the Big Ten right now. It's a team that we thought would be a little bit higher, but I think they've just really been going through some injuries this season. But that happens, and that's basketball, and that's just another reason why UCLA is looking so dominant right now in their conference.
Yeah, it seems like every game, it's almost like a lead by committee. It's not only just Lauren Betts. It's not only just Kiki Rice. Every single game, there's somebody else that is taking over who is going to be the leading scorer in that game. And that makes it so difficult defensively too, because you can't just game plan like we're all going against Lauren Betts. You have to game plan for everybody who can go and get a bucket. And I think the example here is this past week, their scoring depth. Kiki Rice had 25 points, leading the Bruins past Minnesota, which they won comfortably 76-58. And then in that blowout win against Maryland, again, a very difficult ranked opponent, UCLA beat them 97-67. But that night was led by Gabriela Jaquez, who had 22 points, and then fellow guard Clarice Ledger-Walker had 17 points, 9 rebounds, and 8 assists. That week, Bruins were shooting 63% from the field and 57% from three-point range. Those are insane numbers at this point in the season. They're way too comfortable with each other, and nobody can really take them down at this moment.
I would have to agree. When you're looking at the other undefeated team in Iowa in the Big Ten, I just still think that UCLA is the more well-rounded group.
Next one is the SEC. Vanderbilt is leading the way. Again, one of the 2 remaining undefeated teams in Division I basketball. They are 19-0 overall this season, but 5-0 in conference play. They are on a 19-game winning streak, and they have beat some very tough opponents still. I think LSU was kind of the one where we weren't sure how that game was going to go. But once they defeated LSU, I feel like that kind of cemented that this is a team that is incredibly strong in SEC play. Obviously, one of the toughest basketball conferences to be in. But I think that real test is coming this weekend, which we mentioned, having to go up against the number 2 team in the SEC right now, who's also undefeated in conference play, avenging their loss against Texas, which was the only loss they had so far this season. Sorry, not undefeated, but that was technically not a conference game. So technically they are undefeated in conference play, which is a little bit interesting, but that's the explanation for that. South Carolina and Vanderbilt is going to be a very interesting matchup.
Definitely. And for the SEC and for a lot of these conferences also, where the talent is so heavy and skilled at the top, because these are also expanded conferences now, where teams just don't play each other one time home, one time away, there's a lot of criteria that you sometimes have to go through when it comes down to seeding and who is crowned the regular season championship. And I remember last season, there was a little bit of controversy between Texas and South Carolina. And so that's why these games, when you're looking at Vanderbilt against South Carolina, or whenever any of these SEC teams play each other, but especially at the top, you just want to own that number 1 spot. You want to be by yourself at the top of the mountain. You don't want to have to go through these different levels of criteria, looking at your record against A, B, and C. And it just takes a little bit of the value away from a potential win, or if you feel like that you deserve to get that number 1 spot. So I think that for Vanderbilt, they have a real shot of potentially cementing themselves at the top, because getting a win against LSU already shows, who is another team I think will finish towards the top, already shows that your record will be very cemented.
For the Big East, It's very obvious. UConn is number one, so we'll move past that. They're on a 19-game winning streak. But the ACC, Louisville is leading the way, 8-0 in conference. Duke looking very strong as well, who has come up in the rankings again for the AP polls. And then in the Big 12, Texas Tech still at the top, but they had their first loss of the season and their first loss in conference play. TCU sitting right underneath them with a very similar stat line. They're 6-1 in conference, 8-2 overall. Texas Tech is 6-1, 19-1 overall so far.
Yeah, for the Big 12 also, there's a lot of room for shifting. We thought that Iowa State was going to be right there, but with some injuries, they've slipped a little bit. And Texas Tech, they've really cemented themselves in that conference, a little bit unexpected. And TCU has a little bit of making up to do themselves after just losing to Ohio State. I just had to think about that one for a second. But so they want to make sure that they keep up their consistency, and it's going to come down to Olivia Miles.
Absolutely. Coming up after this, there's some good matchups to watch today within the Big 10 and the Big 12. We're going to give you a little preview of them.
New year, new systems. This is a time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our business and think there has to be a better way. And there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make. And that's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications. Because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. Your whole team can call and text from one shared business number, so nothing ever gets missed. That can't be used as an excuse anymore. So make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/lockedonnba. That's quo.com/lockedonnba. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. Thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, go check out our new Everydayer Club. Access to an ad-free audio feed of Locked On Women's Basketball compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. So there's a lot of areas where you can go on and listen. So go to lockedonwomensbasketball.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more.
All right, some games to look out for tonight. Number 24, Nebraska going up against Wisconsin and Madison. I think this could actually be a really good game. Wisconsin is coming off of a big overtime win against Oregon. The game went into double overtime, but their leading scorer, who averages 14 points per game, Destiny Howell, dropped 39 points in that game to help set a program 3-point record. She was shooting 10 for 21 from the field, 10 for 16 from three-point line. Her 10 3-pointers that she made marked a program record for the most made in a single game performance and helped contribute to Wisconsin's all-time program high 17 3-pointers in a single game. So that has to give them a big momentum boost. They're playing back at home again. Nebraska right now has dropped a couple of games. All of their games that they have lost this season have been to other ranked opponents, though. But I think Wisconsin could sneakily make this very competitive or come away with a win today.
I agree. Like you said, they're in with Madison, Wisconsin. They're just coming off of a double OT win. And one thing about Nebraska is in those losses this season, it's been the late game execution that has been their Achilles heel. They'll defend and they'll get a lot of stops in a row, but then on the offensive end, sometimes they struggle to convert. Britt Prince is their leading scorer. She's averaging 18 points. So she's the primary scorer and playmaker, but when she's not flowing, it's hard for Nebraska can get into an offensive rhythm.
Another one today, number 19, Texas Tech going up against BYU. As I mentioned earlier, they dropped their first loss of the season and their first conference loss as well. What can we look out for in that game today?
Bounce back. I think, like you said, Texas Tech, they were a part of a very esteemed group, being undefeated, but having that first loss of the season, it was against Kansas State at home. They'll be looking to redeem themselves and stay cemented at the top of the Big 12.
Purdue and UCLA going at it today. UCLA is currently ranked 3rd, but Purdue is making their way out to California, where the Bruins are absolutely perfect at home. Again, they are on an 11-game winning streak. Their only loss coming before conference play. And, we obviously just sat here and glazed them a little bit, maybe. But Purdue, actually, let me go back. Purdue is still a very tough opponent within the Big Ten. We have seen them keep games very competitive, walk away with some significant wins and some upsets this season as well. But I think UCLA, especially at home, is just a little too deep in their bag. And this might be a tough one for Purdue.
It might be tough, but Purdue is coming off of wins versus Wisconsin and Washington in overtime, so they have a little bit of confidence. UCLA has all the confidence probably, but sometimes a little too much isn't the best thing. So I think for UCLA, they just need to continue to not be complacent with where they're at and just stretch that distance between them and the rest of the Big Ten.
Another game today in the Big 12, not a ranked game, however, a significant one given the case in what is happening at Iowa State at the moment. They are 14-5 on the season. They are on a 5-game losing streak. Part of that losing streak was because of Cincinnati, so they are going up against them again. Iowa State has not won a game since Wednesday, December 31st. No wins for them in 2026 so far this season. They're returning back to Hilton Coliseum for the first time in 10 days to take on Cincinnati. But Cincinnati, their record 7-12, but you have to keep an eye out for Maya Perry, who was named to the Big 12's starting 5 this week. She had 19 points in their upset against Iowa in their last game, but in this past week, she's averaged 21 points over 2 games, is shooting 48% from the field, 53% from 3, and 80% from the free throw line. She had a 24-point game. She had an 18-point game. She is on a roll, and she is really kind of what her Iowa State last time.
Exactly. And I think Cincinnati really got that win against Iowa State through a ton of grit and just wanting it more. Iowa State needs to flip that script and get some redemption, because their season right now is in serious jeopardy, especially if they accumulate too many of these losses. You don't want to get into a situation where you have to win the Big 12 in order to get a berth into the tournament.
Yeah, this is going to be a big one for them today. That'll do it for us today on Locked On Women's Basketball, though. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you again tomorrow to go over some of